The Rockville Center Council of PTAs wanted to respond to the growing number of questions about the state assessments that we're hearing from parents in the elementary and middle school buildings. The questions that have come up recently vary from the big picture about the construction and the use of the tests to the nuts and bolts. What exactly happens on test day? We have many questions that came in by email, and we'll try to get through all of them, as well as questions from the audience. We understand some of you may have to leave to pick up your own children. Feel free to go when you need to. I'd like to thank Mr. Recupero, Fran Gumella, Bob Krager, and Rob Lichter for their help in setting this up on short notice. And I'd like to introduce our Rockville Center School Administration panelists. From the Office of Curriculum and Instruction, Janine Sampino, Assistant Superintendent Christopher Pelletieri, Assistant Superintendent of Pupil Personnel Services and Special Education, Noreen Leahy, and Superintendent of Schools, Dr. William Johnson. I will now turn it over to Dr. Johnson for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Testing is always a subject that generates a good deal of anxiety on the part of people who are involved, whether they be adults taking tests, children taking tests, or the adults of children taking tests, or the parents of children taking tests. In this case, what the issue really has to do with what's going on in New York State with regard to the official New York State exams. And what is the position of the school district, and what is it that parents can do as responsible adults, responsible parents, caring for their children and worrying about what, in fact, can come from any actions that they decide to take that involve their children. Let me just talk to you for a few seconds about the state tests. Initially, when they were put in place in 1995, the state exams and in grades 3 through 8 really were in grade 4 and 8, and they were designed specifically to provide both the state and the federal government information on how well schools were in fact doing. So it was a means by which school districts were allowed to gather information, find out about how well their children were doing at two critical junctures in children's education in 4th and 8th grade, and at the same time provide both the federal government and the state government an opportunity to measure the progress of schools in which these two grades were located, to in fact make judgments as to whether or not the schools and or the districts were in fact doing their job effectively. NCLB passed in the early 2000s, and I believe it was in 2002, that the decision was made to move it to 3 through 8, so that in every grade from 3rd through 8th grade, children would be tested, and that the purpose of this test was again to provide a more refined view of progress that children were making and do it on a grade by grade by grade level, rather than in fact two critical points. And so when that went into place, the intent was again to gather information about children, provide kids an opportunity to take these tests, and at the same time to give the state and the federal government information that would enable them to know whether or not children within these schools were in fact making adequate progress, and whether the preponderance of kids in their school or the majority of kids in these schools were in fact making satisfactory progress. More recently, what was introduced was the idea that this test data could be utilized for another purpose, which was to evaluate staff. And both teachers and principals were included among those for whom these tests were now going to be utilized to gather information. So the information, the database that we're looking at, really has its foundation in providing tests to children, but now the multi-purpose was to not only provide us information, provide you information, provide us information about the progress of our children, but also to be used to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction within a school, a district, and now in a classroom, teacher by teacher, and in a school, principal by principal. Each time you introduce another dimension to the testing, what you ultimately do is challenge the people who are designing these tests to figure out a way to have them become valid and reliable. Usually in the evaluation of staff, reliability is a critical piece. In the evaluation of children, validity is a more valuable piece of information. So there is this tension that exists in the development of tests, particularly because they have a multiplicity of uses of what to do with regard to the technical aspects of validity and reliability. In the last 2 years, there are those of us who have taken a look at the tests that have evolved over time, taken a look at the means by which the state has made a decision to develop these tests, and have said that they are really and truly problematic. Putting that aside for just a moment, we also have come to recognize that the state and the federal government have encouraged two things going on parallel, two things happening at the same time. The second being a change in the curriculum. So that we, at the same time as looking at these tests, must also now begin to incorporate into our vision of what it is that we are doing in the schools, the Common Core. So beginning really in the 11-12 and 12-13 school years, we were actually asked by the state to get heavily involved in the incorporation of these new standards in the development of our curriculum and the management and the provision of instruction to kids within our system based upon these Common Core standards. We did it, and we were and still are a Common Core school district, just so we have that clearly understood. Returning now just to the testing issue. Usually when a test is developed, you need to have the people who are, in fact, providing instruction to the children competent and familiar with the content of what it is that you are teaching. So that over a period of time, you can be confident as a test designer that you're actually testing what kids have learned because the teachers know what they're doing. They have clearly been taught what the curriculum is, what it means, what the standards are, and in fact have had experience in fact doing their job in providing instruction in the Common Core. A couple of problems that arose as a result of the introduction to the Common Core and the idea of tests being used for teachers and the development of new tests in order to accommodate all of these various purposes to the tests. It really has to do with the validity of the tests. Are they truly a valid measure of what your children know in school? Just to make a long story a little bit shorter, it's been our experience that there is not an exact match between what we know about your children and what the test data is telling us. For 2 years now, we have examined very carefully the results, even though last year it was somewhat scant because many people chose not to have their children sit for the exam. But certainly in the very first year in which it was done, what we found out was that there was an overrepresentation of kids at the lower level, when in fact we knew they were more competent than in fact the tests suggested they are. What we did in this school district was to say we can't use this data. It is not a valid representation of what our kids know and are able to do. We made the decision to adopt something called the NWEA, which is an alternative way of, in fact, measuring reading and math, to do it on a computer, to do it in 45 minutes, and we use it 3 times a year, and provide our teachers with what we thought, and we now believe, and have it verified, is both valid and reliable information about the progress that our children are making within the school system in both reading and in math. We're very comfortable, we're very confident that the information that we're getting back, that we're sharing with you, and we're sharing with our staff, and using to take a look at the effectiveness of our overall instructional program is both valid and reliable. The state does not recognize the NWEA, nor will they accept it. They have insisted on developing and using their own tests. The tests that they develop are not done by the state itself. They, in fact, have a private company develop these tests for them. They put out a bid. There's a bid actually out in the market right now for tests to be developed for the next and subsequent years. So there are private vendors who are doing this. It is not the state developing this or using its own teachers, in fact, to develop this. So there are lots of problems with how the tests were developed, the fact that they were administered to kids prior to the time that teachers became comfortable, and you don't want to use the word competent because we're not dealing with competence at se, but at least competent in the sense that they had the experience necessary to provide the teaching experience to maximize learning in your children. That takes time. Familiarity, understanding of the curriculum, trying it out, working with it over a period of time. Generally, when tests are developed, you have to give, particularly when you're measuring new content, it takes about 2 years before you can expect that both children and teachers have reached the point where you're getting back valid information on the test. It never happened in New York. We're into this really the second full year of full-blown testing of the Common Core, and issues are still arising with regard to the length of the test, the complexity of the questions, the necessity for sitting for 3.5 hours of testing when in fact, for example, in Rockville Center, we know that we can do exactly the same thing in 45 minutes. So there are lots of issues that continue to arise with regard to the state testing program. In this school district, we have taken the position that we are officials of the state. We have to respect the rights of every parent, every family, to make a decision for themselves and for their children, and that at the end of the day, we will provide every child in this school district in grades 3 through 8 the same opportunity as any child elsewhere in the state to take the New York State exam, but we will also honor the decisions of families to, in fact, not have their children sit for those exams. It is really a family decision. It is something that you really have to think clearly about, think thoroughly about. It is not an easy decision to make. We respect that. And yet at the end of the day, I think you know from those of you who have been in attendance at meetings or go to our presentation usually in September and October, where we talk about test results and we talk about where we stand in relation to the rest of the world and the state, that in fact we're not using the state data, we use in fact the NWEA. So we don't rely on it, we don't use it, we don't consider it at this point in time a valid measure of what your children can do. We have a satisfactory alternative that we feel has been in fact validated nationally, does a better job, provides our teachers in a timely fashion with the information that they need in order to make the appropriate decisions for modifying instruction if that's necessary, or for us as a system to provide support to your children. So that gives you a little bit of a sense, I think, of both the history of testing in New York State, what it's been used for, and where we stand right now. What we'd like to do is to give you an opportunity to spend some time engaged in a conversation with us. And that's why I've asked other people from my office to join me today and kind of engage you in a conversation. I know there are already questions that have been emailed to you. More than happy to have them start, unless you...
That comes up. This microphone on? A question that has come up a few times in conversations and by email. Will the district be penalized if my 4th, 6th, and 7th graders do not take the state tests? And will their teachers be penalized in any way?
2 parts. Number 1, will the district be penalized? At this point, the answer to that is we're not exactly sure if there is going to be a penalty. All I can tell you is this, is that we will be identified as schools and a school system that has not met annual yearly progress because less than 95% of our children are in fact sitting for the exam. We already know that. That's probably going to happen. I don't know, and quite frankly, I have spoken with people in Washington, D.C. and the State Department of Education here in New York, and they kind of scratch their head and are not sure what to do with this. This is not something that is happening in Rockville Center only. For those of you who may or may not know, parents throughout New York State are sitting, just as we are today, in rooms trying to figure out what to do with their families. This is much wider than Rockville Center. It has certainly had its roots probably here on Long Island, but I can tell you in talking with friends of mine in Rochester, in Buffalo, in the Albany area, it is as intense a discussion there in families as it is down here on Long Island right now. Having been in Washington last week and having had an opportunity to meet with people from around the country, I can tell you this is a growing concern, not just here in New York State, but countrywide. And again, the issue is, with regard to, and I know this is kind of a long-winded answer to that question, the state has an obligation, and the federal government has decided that we must participate in a testing program. They can mandate that of me. They can mandate it of every employee that works as a state employee, including teachers, principals, and superintendents. However, and this is unique to this situation, children do not have to sit for the exam. They do not have to take the exam. That cannot be forced. Children have a right, crazy as that may seem, because you say, you're talking about a third grade child to me. What are you, crazy? What do you mean they have a right to do this? Don't you think it's going to be my decision as a parent so that they're not going to sit there and say, I'm exercising my right as an independent citizen of the United States and I am not going to sit. That ain't going to happen, folks. You know that as well as I do. And that's why I say this is a family affair. This must be within the family, and children must have confidence that whatever they do, they feel supported and part of your family and are carrying out essentially the will of what it is that you believe as a family is the right thing to do. But I will tell you that nationwide, parents just like you sitting in this room, certainly island-wide and New York State-wide, are in fact making the decision not to have their children sit for these exams. Everybody has a different reason for doing it. Some people are taking great umbrage with the Common Core. Some people are taking real umbrage with the tests themselves. It seems to be a real mixed bag wherever you go, wherever you happen to engage people in conversations about this. But I know that it's been a very difficult and tough decision for many families here in Rockville Center, as it is for those in New York State, and what appears to be a nationwide movement right now. So children do not have to sit and take the exam. No child can be forced to take a state exam. I am required by the state to at least set up the circumstances where a test can be provided to every child, and I will do that. So you can rest assured that everyone in this school district will be treated with equal respect, and that's in fact the conversations I've had with our staff here in the central office, with our building principals. We must respect the decisions that families make. If you choose to take the exam, you should not feel in any way that you're going to be denigrated by anybody in the school district. We are in fact going to provide you with the same respect as anybody who makes the decision not to have their child sit for the exam. So we need to understand very clearly that it is a decision that is not made by me. I cannot, but I swear every year to uphold the laws of New York State. The law requires me to do something, I will do it. So you need to understand that I will carry out my responsibilities as the superintendent of schools and make sure that the state exams are in fact presented to children in this school district. They cannot tell me what I have to think about the exam. They cannot tell me what I will do with regard to how I will respect both parents of either decision. People are not going to be, I'm not going to, in fact, force people to do one thing or the other. And we did that last year, I thought, very successfully. I don't think any child went home feeling that they were in trouble if they either sat for the exam or did not sit for the exam. And we will continue with that practice again this year. There were two parts to that. What was the second one?
Teachers, will teachers be penalized in any way?
Teachers will not be penalized. I don't know how else to say that. The way in which our APPR plan, which is the plan that we put together for teachers in the school district, we have tried to minimize the impact that the state number has on a teacher's overall score. And in fact, we have been successful in doing that. It's been approved by the state. And consequently, any action that is taken by parents or children in the school district will have no damaging effect on their teachers. I think you need to understand that. So the second part of that is that for it to be considered by the state to be a valid score, they have to have 16 scores. That means 8 children in a classroom must take both the ELA and the math. So they need 16 scores for it to be considered valid. If not, it's thrown out. But apart from that, I can just say to you again, I'll repeat it, teachers will not be hurt if children do not sit for the exam.
Related to that, there was a follow-up question. Is it going to make a difference if I opt my child out of the exams? How many children need to opt out to make an impact?
That's a tough one to answer. I'm not sure how to answer that. All I can tell you is that in a classroom, you need 16 scores. And they can be a combination of ELA and math, but there has to be 16 scores. Anything below that then will cause those numbers cause it to be thrown out. So they will not get a score.
I just would want to add to that only a small percentage of our teachers really get a score from the state that's calculated by the state. It's just teachers of ELA and math between 4th and 8th grade. So there are many teachers in the district that already get a state score that's assigned to something called the student learning objective. It's a shared score. And so if a teacher of ELA and math between 4 and 8 doesn't have 16 scores, we simply revert to the shared scores. So there's really no impact. It's not like they get a 0 or anything like that. There's absolutely no impact whatsoever.
Let me just add one other dimension to this, and I don't want to get technical, although a lot of the conversations I end up in with my colleagues either in the state department or at the county level or the state level sometimes have to focus on a lot of the technical aspects of this. But there's a whole statistical package that compares one set of scores from a prior year to the current set of scores this year. And then there's this thing called either a value-added or a growth score. And what they're looking at is comparing the growth of a child from point A to point B. So it only affects grades 4 through 8. Third grade kids don't have a score from the prior year, so they don't have that growth score. So teachers are not among, third grade teachers are not among those for whom there is this growth score. Now understand that again, getting down into the statistical analysis of this, there's a lot more error in these scores. And when we get down to the reliability issues with regard to what it is on the individual level, that there is more than acceptable levels of error. So the probability of a child sitting 2 weeks later and getting the same score is reduced significantly because of the error that is built into this test that they haven't corrected for at this point. So you have point A error, point B error, and then you have the two scores being compared to one another and their different scores, which compounds the error. So any of you who have been involved in statistics understand what the compounding of error does to the whole concept of reliability and whether or not you can justify a score for any teacher on the basis of all of that error. The jury's still out on that, and I will tell you that that is one of the main issues with regard to the use of this test data for evaluating teachers. There has not been a single court case, and I know that the lawyers are chafing at the bit to get the first one, because what they want to do is to drag this data into the courts so that they can demonstrate clearly that there is so much error that, in fact, you cannot use this test data to demonstrate the effectiveness of a teacher simply on a statistical basis alone. So that is also kind of one of those backroom debates that continue to go on, and that those people who are involved in putting together either the value-added or gross statistical packages have a huge problem to overcome. And to the best of my knowledge, it is still being debated as to whether or not there is any real validity to the scores, these gross scores or the value-added scores, which compare one year to the other. So, at any rate, for whatever that may be worth, it gets to the heart of whether or not a teacher can be hurt by this, and the answer to that, again, is no.
A question on the physical procedure, the day of the exams, if a child is not taking them. Are they given a test booklet that they then must refuse? Are they separated up front from test takers? How does the actual opt-out movement work in a classroom?
I've written to the principals, and I'm pretty sure they have all shared it with the parents. If they haven't yet, they will. And essentially what it means is that children will be allowed to come to school if their parents have notified us that they do not want them to sit for the exam. They will come in the elementary buildings, for example, to school that day, and then they will be just separated and brought to two separate locations. Children who are not taking the exam will not have to sit in the classroom with those who are. So the logistics are a little bit different in every school. I'm sure Tom or Cooper, wherever he may be, could respond to it here in Wilson School, but what we have done is to have each principal figure out where they're going to have kids who are taking the test sit so that they are with their classmates who are taking the exam, and they don't have to sit there and see a child sitting right next to them doing something else. So we decided to do that last year. We did it last year, and I think it worked out very well. In the middle school, when we find out, kids are already assigned to rooms before they ever walk into the building. So we don't go to a homeroom and then split. In the elementaries, they go to their regular assigned room, but in the middle school, they go to separately assigned rooms based upon the information that we've gotten back from parents.
Okay, a question from a middle school parent. My child came home saying that these tests are useless. I'm wondering what kind of information is being propagated at school, and I'm concerned that my once motivated child is now deflated. How do we talk to children without confusing him or her about the tests?
Look, I'm still hopeful that down the road that the state is going to find a test that's going to make sense for evaluating children and try to get it out of the business of using it for so many different purposes, because each time you add another purpose to the test, you make it far more complicated and difficult to come up with a satisfactory means of just identifying what you need to know about a child. Right now, the multiplicity of purposes has caused the test to erode into something which is far less than we would like it to be. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I just want to find out, what are we using these tests for? Is the district using them all at all? It sounds like we're spending a lot of time on them and we're not gleaning any information about our children and how they're working out. And, you know, it sounds like we're relying on the NWEA versus the state tests.
we don't use the state tests.
At all.
No.
Okay.
My question is, for the last 2 years, I've heard a lot about opting out, what we're doing for the non-test taker, where we're putting the non-test taker, how we're treating the non-test taker, how we're not using the test for anything. I really came here today to find out what we're doing for the test taker. In the 11 years that I've been in the district with my children and lived in Rockland Center for 20, when the test was coming, my children were prepared for the exam. My son, who's in 4th grade, last year he wasn't really prepped well. His test-taking stamina was not developed. He was not familiar with the format of the test. He really went into basically academic suicide while his friends were playing on an iPad. I believe in taking the test, not that the test is great, but I think he should take the test. I think the movement to stop the test isn't having children opt out. So I want to know what we are doing for the test taker. Are we preparing them? Are they taking practice exams ever? We've done, as far as I can see, nothing compared to my older 2 children who did plenty. So I would like you to tell me what you're doing for the test taker to prepare them and the day of the test. I don't think the testing environment was as good as you think it was. My son came home very upset. Johnny's not taking it, Susie's not taking it, I don't want to take it. So please tell me what you're doing for the test taker.
You know, one of the things that always troubled me about the older state tests is that we did prepare them for the tests and therefore never really got a true reading on what it is, and it was more about just preparing somebody for a test, and the tests drive the curriculum. So one of the things that we find very valuable about the NWEA is that we don't have to prepare the kids for the exam. It is a sampling of what it is that they do on a regular basis that enables them, or enables us, to truly sample what it is that they can do. They come in relaxed, they are not upset by it, they're not getting sick to their stomach, they're not being pressured by their parents, they're not being told that, or in some cases that I recall, people actually went out and got tutors. So the point of the matter is, if it was a test that I felt was really valuable, worthwhile using, we would use it. If I thought for 1 second that the New York State exam was going to provide me with valuable information about children, we would use it. Now, if there is a very strong sentiment that kids need to be prepared for this exam, apart from it, I can tell you that there is a huge controversy right now among parents, and we've heard back from those who get really upset when we start dedicating class time to preparing their children for this exam.
I just want to understand. The NWPA doesn't require preparation, so we like that exam. Okay? So we're not doing anything to prepare for the New York State exam. Is that the answer?
We always took the position that we did not want to prepare kids for a state exam, that we felt that the instructional program that we provided children adequately prepared them for whatever exam the state either introduced into their lives or that the school district introduced into their lives. It is not like a final exam in the middle school or the high school, and keep in mind that, I mean, even there we don't begin to really introduce them until the 7th grade. So this is very different than the Regents exams, than an IB exam, than an AP exam, where in fact you're going to measure how much content they have learned. It is supposed to be a snapshot of where your child is at any given time in their life. Now, interestingly enough, think about when this state exam is given. It's not given at the end of the year, it's given in the 2nd week in April. So why am I, and one of the other concerns that we have is that prepping for this exam will cause a false sense that the year is done. And that if we this becomes the climax in the story, and that there is maybe one more chapter, but it's all downhill from here. And that the real effort needs to be focused on the exam.
Okay, but that climax would be brought on by the district and the teachers, not the student. They don't know that this would be the climax, the New York State exam. My problem is that that's great that you've been a wonderful superintendent for many, many years, and I'm sure your feeling about the New York State exam is probably very accurate. However, we're not Friends Academy. We're still a public school district, and these exams still exist. So I get we're not going to prepare them, but now what are we doing about the test-taking environment? The whole thing for the test taker has become extremely negative.
By the way, there's nobody in the state ed department that's going to sit here and stand here and tell you to prepare your kids for those exams.
Okay?
You know that. Okay.
Fine, but there still needs, the state's putting the test out there. The state wants us to take the test. The state has all these things that they want us to take the test. This is how I benchmark my child. How is my child going to perform the best on this test? The environment's not good. You might think it is, but from the parent perspective of the kid taking the test, it's a very negative. You just go on some of our social media, and you're basically called a child abuser if you let your child take the test. This is what's going on in the community. And the school district is promoting that we opt out. All of the information is about opt out. All of it.
These are questions that parents have asked. I mean,
I really think, I really think you need...
Everything that I get from the district is about opting out. I just want to know how did
let's
they
go back
get
to what I said to you a few minutes ago. That's not what we're about. We are about doing what the state asks us to do, which is to present to all of our children the opportunity to take this exam, which is what I'm required to do. I cannot force anybody's child to sit in there and take an exam. I can tell you that what was even more uncomfortable the year before was when we had a number of children opting out and they all sat in the same room together. That was a very, very uncomfortable situation. I got complaints left and right, up and down, and all over the place. So what we tried to do last year was, in fact, create a situation where children who, in fact, were taking the test did not have to feel that they were out of place in their building because they were taking the exam, because they were sitting with other classmates who, in fact, like you and like others who feel the same way, send their children and expect them to sit for the exam. That needs to be honored. We fully respect that. We fully honor it. And in fact, we will do everything we possibly can to have your child and every other child who makes the decision to take the exam very comfortable about the fact that they made that decision to come in and take the exam.
Okay, and how are you doing
We're not about opt-out. We're about administering the exam. What's about opt-out is the parental decisions that have been made. We didn't start that. Parents started it.
Okay.
It walked in the door 2 years ago. We need to figure out how to respond to it as a school district so that it makes sense for all of the parents in this community, so that we can respect the rights of those who choose to have their children take the exam and respect the rights of those who choose not to.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask again. So what are we doing for the test taker? We've decided prepping isn't a good thing. And how is the environment that the kids are just in a separate room? What are those other children doing? Are they playing on an iPad or are they sitting there? What are they doing? My son thinks they're doing puzzles and having a good time.
Well, if I could jump in for a second, Dr. Johnson. I know that students are not to be on electronic devices or bring electronic devices. They can bring a book or reading materials. And I know that different principals were going to prepare different packets and such, but it was not to be a celebration of any kind of, or in the gym we're going to have a parade while the other kids are taking the test. There's nothing like that. There is also not to be any type of instruction that's going to take place that's going to disadvantage the students who are taking the test. So that is something definitely that we'll make sure we go back and talk with the principals about in terms of making sure that those environments are respected, both those environments. And it's not a celebration in the other room where kids are not partaking in the test. We'll be very cognizant of that. And I know we spoke to it last year. We'll revisit it for sure this year.
What are the ramifications of a child not taking the test or opting out? Or are there any ramifications of a child opting out? Anything going on their record? How does that work?
There is not. And I can tell you that in other school districts who have not made the decision to have available an alternate means of externally evaluating our children's progress as they move through the system, that can be a problem because then they are left with no information. In Rockville Center, we have opted to use the NWEA, and we use it in kindergarten through 8th grade. So we are able to track the progress of children, but I can tell you that there is no consequence to any child who is not going to sit for the exam. And the reason is that we don't use that information for placement or promotion, which is what the state told us we can't use it for. Just understand, I mean, this is how crazy this situation has gotten. The state puts out an exam and then turns around and says, we're not permitted. There's a law. The law was passed last year, and they said for the next 2 years, we are not permitted to use it for placement or promotion. Let me say that again. The very state that develops the exam has told us we can't use it for placement or promotion. So we don't. But what we do is use the NWEA. And I would hope that you're comfortable with it. We certainly have become very comfortable with it. We feel that it is an excellent measure of how children are progressing. It gives teachers an immediate opportunity to find out where your children are, to share it with you, and in fact help everybody make, I think, good decisions about what their children need in this system. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's actually a perfect segue. Regarding the NWEA, previously with the state tests, certain numbers would trigger some sort of intervention or at least an evaluation for intervention, is my understanding. With regards to the NWEA, is it a lack of growth that would trigger that evaluation? Not moving up statistically, going down? Because we've had bizarre results in my house, I'll say, for 2 children, and I'm not exactly sure how they're being addressed. I don't know if you're seeing them throughout the system, but if we're left to only rely on those results, I can't but question what's happening with my children if I see statistics going up, down, from year to year, beginning to the end, through the winter test seems to be particularly problematic, but I will say even from year to year. So is it just an experience in my own household, or are we seeing it systematically? And if we're left to rely on it, is it reliable?
Yeah, I could answer that, but you've heard enough from me right now. Let Janine to speak. Go ahead.
Hello. First, the NWEA is one of our multiple measures, and on the elementary level, we use it as a universal screening tool for our response to intervention plan. So it's like a baseline of where children are. Depending on what age of the child that you have, it could fluctuate. The earlier grades sometimes have bigger, more growth than, say, some of the upper grade students. We do find that there is a winter dip sometimes, and sometimes that could be based on sickness, weather, sniffles. I mean, there was even a paper from the NWA it's called the winter dip, that we were looking into because some teachers were concerned. But what it does is it does open up that conversation. It's a pointer, it's a watch for us to see, is a child growing? Now, there are norms of where an average second grader, third grader, fourth grader, kindergarten would be. They're redoing those norms based on the latest Common Core data, so we can see where the average child would be, and then a teacher can look at her or his or her class and see where students fall. There's also percentiles of where students fall. So if it's really off, they'll let you know. What normally will happen is they might give something like a benchmark assessment. They might look at some of the reading and vocabulary, or the unit math tests. They use other things to dive into. And if you are really concerned in terms of the up-down, make an appointment with your child's teacher, the principal, the academic support teacher, and they can look at it a little bit more closely and talk to the teacher, the classwork. I mean, it really is, we try to get a full picture of the student, and that's one snapshot that we have. And we're lucky that we have it 3 times a year, because sometimes, especially in the younger grades, sometimes issues don't come up until material does get more difficult. So you want to catch those kids quickly. You want to get to the heart of the problem. So did I answer your question okay? I mean, the winter does have a dip. If you want to go deeper into where your child's RIT level is, look at the percentile part and see if the percentile went up or down a great deal.
Trying to say. So are we finding it to be reliable? We do need data on our children. Mm-hmm. And we sit in parent-teacher conferences, we get report cards, we're told they're fine, but the only data we're seeing that we're told is reliable, at least in my household, is dips, is lack of growth. As I think that's the terminology the NWEA actually uses, negative growth. And that's not a term we want to use with our children or want to see with our children. I know other districts have gone away from the winter test because they continue to see this anomaly of this winter dip. But when you're looking at statistical evidence that your child is dipping, but being told they're fine, in fact, working harder, seeing a lot more out of them in the classroom, if we as a district are putting so much stock in them, are they good enough? Are they what we need them to be for our children if we want to ignore the state tests?
For the growth measure, we look for, we looked from fall to the spring for typical growth. What we use, part of the response intervention plan is that we must do check-ins 3 times a year. So for on the elementary level, for the middle school level, we only do it twice a year. We only do it in the fall and in the spring because response to intervention isn't passed to the middle school yet. It's really K through 4. So we do it, it makes sense for us to collect that data, K-5, so we have a smooth, solid group of scores for those students. If you want to email me, because I'm curious to look at, at your student, I'd be happy to look because I think that for the most part we do see growth, and even if it's small growth, we do. There are dips sometimes. Sometimes it could be content related, sometimes it could be a bad day, sometimes you could ask to be retested, or we can look at another form like a QRI or another type of assessment that we could look at and that's what usually the buildings do. So feel free to, at any point.
I have a question about the NWEA as well. I think it's a great test. My only concern with it, it doesn't measure writing. And whereas the state tests have great comparison essays, my daughter's in 3rd grade, I have a 5th grader here. When my son, we were in another district when he was in 3rd grade in Westchester, they spent from January up until the tests prepping. I don't agree with that either, but we had a very heavy Hispanic population that spoke no English. So that being said, my daughter's in 3rd grade. I have not seen her do any of these essays. And the lack of writing that I've seen her come home with is disturbing to me. My son that's in 5th grade could write and read in Spanish. He wrote Spanish at a 3rd grade level. And I do not see anything coming home that shows me my 3rd grade daughter can do a comparison essay. Can you please respond to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you. The NWA does not offer a writing portion. It's one of the things that they are actually working on now because it would be an issue in terms of where the states to say, and I believe it's Oregon actually uses the NWA as their testing measure for the feds, for the federal government, for No Child Left Behind, but New York won't use it right now. It does not have a writing portion. So we are in the midst this year of a writing overhaul, so to speak. We're doing a lot with Writers Workshop. I've actually met with some of our parents here who have spoken to me about their concern around that. We saw that concern. We shared it with our principals who shared it, the teachers shared it with us. And so we have begun to address that. I'm certain that there's writing taking place. And again, that is something that as a parent, I would have a problem with, and I would be at the doorstep of my teacher and my principal as well. And if there are concerns beyond that, that's what we're here about to follow up with. Writing is a huge piece, and one of the first things I came in with Dr. Johnson, big focus writing, and I dare say the word math.
Hi, I just have a quick question about the validity and reliability of the NWEA as well. My situation's a little bit different. My now 3rd grader, but this was last year, she made steady progress all throughout the year on the 3 assessments of the NWEA, but throughout the year began struggling on several different concepts during the school year, and you know, homework became a bigger problem as the year progressed, you know, to tears. She didn't know what she was doing, yet. And I even brought it up at the March parent-teacher conference and saying, you know, I'm seeing this, you know, she's struggling. And the NWEA results were brought out. No, she's doing fine. She scored in the very high percentile. She's, you know, meeting her marks. Yet by the end of the year, it had really snowballed to the point where we had a tutor all summer to get her back on track. And it was a teacher from within the district that tutored her who was shocked because she knew her from her younger years, at her lack of, just understanding of certain concepts, yet she had done so well on the NWEA, and these problems weren't picked up to the point where I had a tutor all summer.
Okay, I'm going to add, there was something new added at the end of last year called the Learning Continuum to the NWEA, and teachers are really beginning to, from the beginning of the year to now, are still looking at it. And what the Learning Continuum does is it takes the students' NWEA scores and it breaks it down. You could actually click by skills or standards of where then they need help. So I just met with an academic support teacher 2 days ago, and we were looking at a class and certain students. And for her, it was a validation of, oh, good, I'm working on this, this, and this. And then we looked at other pieces and we say, oh, look at this. You know, there was something on informational text, there was something on decoding and fluency. So there were different, it breaks it down by skills. So I think as we learn more and use the data more, that will be helpful. So what we're doing now in the beginning is we try to use another assessment, we try to pinpoint it. There's a lot of morning meetings with teachers on students and, you know, what's the best way to really reach and get all of our students to where they're supposed to be. As grade levels go up, material does get more difficult. And so we really try to, again, catch those kids. So with learning more about the data and using this learning continuum, it does help to pinpoint more where students are struggling.
But this didn't pinpoint her at all. She did very well on the exam.
There are sections where you could click on the NWEA, and some, you know, we were just learning about it this year in terms of how you could really, it will give you an overall score. You could just drill down deeper and deeper into different skills, and we were figuring out as we're going along. So,
I could just add, we don't want to overly rely on any one assessment, right? The best information we get is from our teachers who see our kids each and every day. And so beyond, hey, NWA is saying she's great, see you later, or NWA says she's struggling or dipping, see you later, we need to talk about evidence and we need to talk about what's behind those things. And so, again, I encourage those conversations, meeting with the teachers and the principals, and if those aren't taking place and you're seeing something different, please reach out to those folks and if need be, reach out to us.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm going to have my kids take the test, and I just agree with some of the things that were said earlier, that I think everybody has been given a great opt-out option, but the opt-in to take the test is, I mean, I don't know if I agree with it, I don't, but I believe this is the law, you're supposed to take this test, you take it. I feel you're on a slippery slope when you start telling kids you can opt out. Oh, I don't want to take the Regents, I don't feel like it. Like, where does it stop? I mean, I still believe the way my parents reared me, you were told you're doing it and you do it. So I'm just, because I know last year there was a lot of, oh, high five when coming out of school, we don't have to take the test, oh, you're taking the test. You can't control that, I realize that, but there has to be something done that the kids, and I don't mind if the kids don't take the test, I don't have a problem. If a parent or family decides that's their choice, that's fine. I don't argue with them over it, but I don't want to feel the opposite for my children, that they're picked on for taking the test.
Okay, you bring up a very, very interesting and very important point. It's the slippery slope issue that you just raised. And I know that families struggle with this, because what's right for the 3 through 8, how could it not be right for the Regents exams later on? It's not so easy for young children to make that distinction. And I'm not sure, you have to understand your children. And that's why we're not in any way trying to encourage people to opt out or encourage them necessarily to take the exam. I think that you really need to have a clear understanding with you and your children about what it is. Since, look, the reality is that there are going to be people opting out. So you're going to be dealing with that issue with your children one way or the other. If it is your decision to, in fact, have them take the test, they need to understand that from your point of view, this is a very important part of their life, and we'll work with you on it. I mean, we'll make sure that they are respected and that you are respected and that the decision that you make is one that is valued And I'm not, look, this is a real problem that the state created. And I am really upset by the fact that they did not listen to parents 2 years ago when they could have. I don't know if you were aware of what was going on at the time when the commissioner, he's now gone, but was traveling around the state, and he exacerbated the situation by many things that he said to parents, and it just kind of grew without trying to come to grips with what the real problem is, which is that somebody's got to take a look at these measures, somebody's got to take a look at these tests and decide whether or not they are appropriate for children. And so, at the end of the day, children, in order to graduate, need to take Regents exams. If they do not, they're not going to graduate in New York State. So, at one and the same time, while there may be opportunities to opt out. By the way, there are people who don't sit for Regents exams also and don't graduate. So, just understand, there are very, very real consequences. Now, somebody raised the question before about the consequence for individual children. When somebody decides to opt out of what is a graduation requirement, they don't graduate. So there is a very real consequence. For these 3 through 8 tests, there are no consequences for children. So, but I understand where you're coming from, and thank you very much for your comment. We will respect everything that you have to say, and I would certainly hope that your child is respected, and in fact, we will do everything we possibly can to ensure that he feels like he's doing the right thing when he comes to school that day to take the exam.
I just have a question, and it might just be my lack of knowledge on the NWA, but when the children take the test, are they given as much time as they need to complete the test? Unlike the state test, which I understand is timed. And if that's the case, obviously now the state test is timed, the child doesn't finish. What is the impact of the child that does very poorly on this test? What is it on the impact on the child, on the teacher, and obviously on the district? So if you could explain that a little bit for me in reference to the NWEA in terms of the timing and, you know, is everybody just given as much time as they need to take the test? For my own clarification, I just might not know.
Judge, Chris Donovan, he wants to answer that. Go ahead, Chris.
For the most part, kids will take it together, and I've actually sat in this auditorium with students who took it sitting on iPads in their chairs. It was interesting to see an assessment taken that way as opposed to in the classroom with bubble sheets and things like that. So I think the kids were much more comfortable doing it this way. For the most part, kids will finish in about 45 minutes or so. Some kids need a little bit longer, so they're given a little bit longer. You can even go out, have lunch, come back, and finish the last couple of questions if you need to. We do try to time it to a certain extent. Some kids receive accommodations, so they'll get a little more time. So it is not the pressure, certainly, of the state assessment with the time, ding, put your pencil down, collect that up. So that's a different aspect to it. And if a child is struggling, the test it's not a finite test. It doesn't end at a certain point. It ends when a child, it's an adaptive test. I'll take a certain number of questions, and as I start to get to most of the questions half right and half wrong, they'll kind of stop me right there, because then it's found my point. If I keep getting them right, it's going to keep going higher and higher and higher. And you've heard probably kids saying, well, I had a Robert Frost poem to read today in 4th grade, and so that would be a concern or the math. I wasn't able to do that math. I haven't learned that yet. Because that child has done well and that portion has gotten further than you might expect them to. But again, it'll level them off at the point where it thinks it's done, and it'll stop it for them. And if a child is struggling again, we've encouraged our teachers to, okay, we'll revisit this at a later time. Again, tests are a snapshot. The state test is a snapshot. The NWA test is a snapshot. It's a shame that we talk so much about tests. I'm going to tell you, there's a number in my head, 83. The number 83 is the percentage of students that graduate Southside High School with a Regents diploma with advanced designation. That is the state's benchmark for what is college and career readiness. The rest of the state is at 36%. So I wish we could spend more time talking about how we got there, because that's really an outstanding, I'm not patting myself, I'm patting this guy on the back and the parents in this community, because they've done an outstanding job around that. So this is a small piece. It takes up a lot of our conversation, our time. There's a lot of power behind both sides of that issue. And as Dr. Shea said, it's a tough issue for us, and we feel how parents feel about it, and we feel we have concerns and issues around that same thing. But the NWA, to get back to your question, does take that time away a little bit, that pressure away a little bit, and we think it's a better benchmark assessment because of that.
You know, what might be interesting at a PTA meeting one night is have some parents sit down and take the NWEA. See, I'm serious. We've done it. We actually had the commissioner come in, the commissioner of education come in, because he didn't know what it was. And I won't tell you what his score was, but he did sit for the NWEA. As Chris mentioned, I don't know, you know, we use terminology that is not necessarily familiar. It can be used in this context, but what it means, it's an adaptive test. And the reason why it only takes 45 minutes is that your son or your daughter does not have to sit and take every exam question that's in the exam. The computer selects questions on the basis of what your son or daughter is in fact answering. So if they see a pattern where they're struggling at this level, they begin to drop down with the questions so that they can, again, this gets to the whole issue of reliability, so that there are enough items at their comfort level or their challenge level to enable us to make a judgment as to whether or not it's real or not real, that score. Likewise, some of the best readers, let's say, or best math students will be challenged almost immediately, will jump right up. So they don't have to sit there and do all of the questions that everybody else does. One of the reasons why the state exam takes 3.5 hours, everybody has to answer every question. Now that's done for another purpose, because the test is not designed to measure children, it's designed to measure teachers. So I mean, if it's the whole design, the purpose is very different. I don't know if we can arrange it, but it might be worthwhile at a PTA meeting to have one of our teachers or the principal, in fact, either put it up on a screen or in fact have somebody come in one night and sit and take it. It's a very, very different kind of environment, and one which we've come to appreciate, understand, and I think value here in the school district. It is really what the tests of tomorrow are going to look like. I know this. I know because I work with the state. Strange as it may seem, as critical as I am of the exam, I actually work with them on helping them develop new tests, and they want to move in that direction. Haven't figured out how to do it yet, but they really would like to emulate what it is that is done by the NWEA and move to the computer environment.
On this topic, since we're live streaming this, 2 emails have just come in expressing their parents expressing their gratefulness that the district uses the NWEA, that it gives them the information they need, their children enjoy taking it. One just emailed in, what can we do as parents to advocate for the NWEA tests instead of the state tests? Is there anything that we can do as parents at the state level to express our desire for tests more like these than the current state tests?
We're going to work on that, and I can tell you that there are a number of us who look, the NWEA, we really don't have a long track record with it. We've only been using it really for 2 years right now and are becoming comfortable with it. It was something new to us. We were a little bit reticent about jumping in with both feet. But as we begin to use it more and more, we become more and more comfortable with it. We are, in fact, cognizant of its limitations. The point you made is a very valid one, a real one. And I can tell you that we talk a lot about writing right now and how making sure that it is adequately assessed, and looking around right now for the words that I've always used is external validation of what it is that we do internally here. So one of the reasons why when we realized that the state test was in trouble, we shifted to the NWEA, it was because we believe very strongly that in order for us to know whether or not we're doing a decent job, we have to connect ourselves to an external measure that we have nothing to do with developing, so that we know that we, in comparison to the rest of the world, that's why we are involved with the IB, that's why we have always really been heavily involved in the Regents program and the Regents program with advanced designation. We use these as indices to help us judge the efficacy of our instructional programs. So we're not trying to walk away from these external validators. I would just hope that they develop these tests. And we're looking right now to find out what we can use to help us better understand what we can find out about kids' writing skills. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. My daughter came home from the middle school from her ELA class with an assignment, and basically it was like a breakdown of what the ELA test was going to be over the 3-day period, on the types of questions, and what they, the time frame they had to do it. And then the last line of this, we were supposed to sign it, she said, and the last line on this sheet said, "Your performance counts towards your grade. Do your best." They were told that they were going to be taking a practice ELA test in class, and then their score was going to be used as a quiz grade towards their grade. So I didn't sign it because I objected to it, and reached out to the ELA teacher and was told that, "Oh, good, you got this," by me emailing her, confirmed that I read this, and confirmed in writing that it was going to be a quiz grade that was going to be put into their average. A few days later, the kids were in the car and said that they were told by their teachers that because they all did so poorly, that the quiz wasn't going to be graded.
I'm aware of what you're talking about. Yeah, it found its way into my office, as do many other things. I did speak to the principal.
It did affect some of the kids. It really did.
I don't want to talk about the teacher, and I don't know who it was that did it. So, but please. So, this is not what we're about. I have no objection to people preparing kids for a test, but they can do it through integrative types of activities rather than, in fact, putting them together as quizzes. It's not that kids shouldn't be prepared or that the teachers shouldn't prepare the kids. What it is that if it's aligned to the Common Core, then the activities should be part of assignments that make sense in relationship to what we're doing instructionally in the classroom. The whole idea of it being used as a quiz, I don't. I spoke to Sheila about it, and we both kind of agreed that it was not the best thing in the world to do, to use it as a quiz grade. I don't think it was going to.
The kids are reading this. I don't know if you all have a copy of it, and they're thinking, "Oh my, look at all this! All this is on this test. So is it scare tactics? Is that what it is? Is that what it was meant to be?"
I read it. I was disappointed to see that it went home to parents, and I think we have to be a little bit more vigilant and understand that it left a very bad taste in the mouths of some people. So.
I think the state would not be happy that they saw this, correct?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. No.
All right, we probably have time for one more. I know you've got.
Yeah, I've got it at 3 o'clock, so.
I'm going to wrap it up with you.
It's a lot of pressure. Thank you for giving us an overview of the problematic nature of the test. I think that probably helps some of us who are trying to wrap our heads around it a little bit more. Is there a resource, or I understand that the state has released only a small number of the questions, but I think for some parents who are still looking to make a decision, where can we go to find the portions of the test that have been released so that we can take a look at it ourselves?
Great way to
Engage
end.
New York, the teachers.
And it gets to something that you were talking about earlier. Yes, on Engage. Chris, do you know do you have the website?
It's on Engage New York, and there's actually, it's engageny.org, and there is a section that says annotated ELA and math questions, and those have the release, that will lead you to the released questions per grade level for ELA and math.
I think that'd be a good place for parents who are looking, just to get an idea of what would be put in front of them that day. It might help to provide some clarity for us. Thank you.
There were a certain number of questions that were on last year's exams that were released, and they are on Engage New York, so you can see them. Yes. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the candor of your questions. Let me go back and say it again. I'm going to finish by saying it's tough to be a parent today. This does not make it easier. So that anything that we can do to help you out, please feel free to call anybody in this room. My number is listed. I'll tell you it right now. It's 255-8920. Any questions that you may have that were not answered today? Any questions that you have about your individual children? Sometimes a little bit awkward for us to respond because we try not to engage people in conversations about individual children in the school district. If you have questions that you feel need to be answered by us, please feel free to give us a call. We'd be more than happy to answer those questions, all right? Thank you again for your attention and your candor. Thank you.